Declassified.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes. And this is the Ripple Effect Podcast. I have a great episode for you today. I started off a little slow in regards to the podcast. You can kind of tell my energy was a little low. I try to balance everything out. I try to balance out keeping my wife happy, keeping my kids happy, keeping myself happy. And how I do that is I go to the gym in the morning before work. That means 5 in the morning, 5:30, and try to get a quick workout. It helps with just waking myself up for the day. It helps with I mean, it really isn't a hobby. It's a way of life. It helps. It incredibly changes my mood. It helps with just dealing with the stressful day that sometimes is ahead of me. It helps with how I tolerate maybe stressful kids or a disagreement with somebody at work or at home or whatever it may be. So it's necessary. But what's also necessary is my marriage, right? So, like I say all the time, a marriage, a relationship, your relationship with your friends, your kids, your wife, it's like a plant. You have to keep watering it. If you don't water it, it dies. Well, that also means that my wife and I have to find time for each other. So during the day, I have a lot of caffeine to get through my workout in the morning, get through my work day, make sure when I'm with my kids, I'm not just bullshitting and just being there, just being in the same room and ignoring them, but I have energy to actually do fun stuff with them and constantly enjoy each other's company and laugh and be in a good mood, which is why going to the gym in the morning is so important. So I do come home in a good mood, and I stay in shape, so I have the energy to play sports with my kids and all that stuff. Then we put the kids to bed, and my wife and I we have a little dinner date just about every night. We've decided that at least 4 or 5 times a week, usually 4, we'll put the kids to bed. And we'll pop open a bottle of wine and we have dinner when they go to bed. If that means they're not sleeping and they're going to stay up till 9, 10 o'clock, then be it. Then, it is what it is. Then we'll have a late dinner, but we get to enjoy a bottle of wine, watch a show that we're into. We always try to pick a series that we're into so we can have something that we can enjoy together. And we have a little dinner date. We don't need a babysitter. We don't need to wait till the weekend. Just about every night, We'll pop open a bottle of wine. Even if my wife works late and she gets home late, we'll still do it. And we get to enjoy each other's company. We get to rewind. We get to hit reset. We get to just chillax. And that's why I love wine, because wine always gives you the same buzz. The relaxing, just time to end the day. Nothing in the world could make you upset type of buzz, and I love that. So to balance all this means sometimes I'm low energy at some point during the day. In the beginning, to get back to what I was gonna tell you in the beginning of this intro, was that my energy was a little low. Started having caffeine in the beginning of the podcast. Hopefully, if it's not noticeable, then I just kind of blew up my spot. But if it is noticeable, then once the caffeine kicks in, you realize that I'm a little more upbeat, but hopefully I didn't go into the conversation too low energy. I felt like I was. I don't know if sometimes I feel a certain way and it doesn't come off that way. It's just in my head. It's because I know that I'm a little low in energy. But this conversation really gets really good at the end of the conversation, probably half an hour in, 45 minutes in. The guest and I, Brian and I, really start sparking, and we start talking about a lot of really interesting topics in regards to foreign policy and censorship and 9/11 and all the topics that are really intriguing to myself and probably many of the listeners. So hopefully you guys enjoy this, and hopefully you enjoy a little bit of my personal philosophy I just shared in this intro, and it wasn't just a complete waste of 5 minutes of your life. And hopefully you can take something from that. But with that said, also remember to support the show. Patreon. We have a Patreon page, which is, wait, I should tell you who the guest is. The guest is the founder of 28pages.org, Brian he told me how to pronounce his name. McGlinchey. Yes, Brian McGlinchey. I just wanted to pronounce it correctly. Hope he doesn't get mad. But either way, he is a researcher, the founder of 28pages.org. He has very interesting perspectives and opinions, and really well versed in foreign policy and current events and stuff like that, and 9/11, which is all the topics we talk about today. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. Back to my Patreon page. If everybody just gave me $1, I could maybe do this full time. But that's the goal. We'll continue reaching for that goal. I have my 200th episode coming around the corner, my 6-year anniversary coming around the corner. 6 years ago, I probably never thought I'd make it to 200 episodes. So even though I'm not doing this full time like I assumed I might be if I made it to 200 episodes, I also didn't know if I'd be doing it for this long. And I've had some amazing guests and conversations, so no complaints here. And some amazing fans, listeners who listen to this show and contact me, just really, really awesome people and amazing guests that I've gotten to establish relationships with. So no complaints. But our Patreon page, if you want to support the show, there is a Patreon page, and you will be the first to know about booking guests. And the second I have somebody booked, I will let you know. So that's a little perk on if you're a Patreon supporter. Also, the music you hear, it's all my personal music called Theory 6. It's my solo project, and you can get that anywhere. You can get digital downloads. All that money goes to supporting the show. And our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, if you want to see the guests and I have a conversation, anybody who calls in video, you can do that. What else? I feel like I'm forgetting some stuff. No, I think that's about it. I have some great episodes coming up, so keep a lookout. And thanks again, guys, from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate all the support. And it's still boggling my mind that 6 years is right around the corner. And it was before I was married, before I had kids. It was before I knew a lot and established a lot of the perspectives I have today. It's been a journey, and I don't say that lightly. I really have grown and learned a lot. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Hey, Brian, it's Ricky Verandas.
Hey, great to be with you, Ricky.
Hey, thanks for being with me. I appreciate it. I guess we can start it right off. We'll get right into it. I like to keep these conversations casual and flowing. I used to do the intros the same time the call would start, but it would always kind of ruin the flow of the conversation. So I feel like sometimes just hopping right into it is the best way of keeping it going and keeping it casual. But
okay.
Let's get right into some of your background. So how did you get involved with the 28pages.org, the website, the topic just in general, and then what sparked your interest in investing so much time and effort into this?
It was a few years back, and I've kind of had a long simmering frustration with U.S. foreign policy and a lot of other issues relating to policy and the government. And I was kind of looking for an outlet. What could I do to try to help make the world a better place, help the discourse in the country. And I became aware, I just happened to see a press conference video of Congressman Thomas Massie and others making the case for the declassification of 28 pages on foreign government links to the 9/11 attacks. And the more I learned about it, I looked around and saw that there was no website. You had congressional leadership, but you didn't have any other force out there that was trying to speak directly to people to foster grassroots involvement, encouraging people to contact Congress and so forth. So I decided to launch this website, 28pages.org, to serve as a font of information about it, of reliable information, well-sourced information, and also to help agitate and push for people to get involved and to pressure Congress, pressure the White House to do the right thing and declassify those pages.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of just trying to do your part in making a difference. That's kind of the reason why I started the podcast. I kind of was on the same boat where I was thinking to myself, I'm like, what am I contributing? What am I doing? Can I, I just felt like there's something more fulfilling I could be doing. I named it the Ripple Effect Podcast because I wanted to push this idea that we can all start a ripple, and you never know how big that ripple becomes. And that idea, I feel like, is so important because I think so commonly people kind of just they feel like they're defeated before they even start doing anything. They feel like, oh, what difference can I make? Why even bother? Ignorance is bliss, that type of thing, where it's like, it's the world's too complicated and there's too many moving parts and it's too complex, and what can I do? I'm just a regular person. But most of the great changes in the world have been, at least sparked by regular people who just felt like they could make a difference. So I love that story, that idea of just kind of doing it, not because of any other reason outside of just wanting to contribute something.
Right. That's a great name for your podcast. I appreciate you giving the backstory on that name.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the listeners have probably heard it one too many times. But yeah, it's a concept that I try to continue to push, and this podcast has become a perfect example of it because like I said, similar to yourself, I really just wanted to, I have a full-time job and I'm just a common person. I have a regular full-time job. I have nothing special about me, no background that makes me any better prepared, or no resume that makes me any better for podcasting or trying to spread information than anybody else. But I just kind of felt like, why not? If not me, then who else? And
Yeah.
And if for anything, for no other reason, just for personal fulfillment, I guess it's, in a way, it's like you're trying to do something unselfish for a selfish reason, right? You're trying to make the world, like you said, a better place, but in a way for a selfish reason, because it's for some type of positive feeling or emotion that you're getting out of it. But also having kids and stuff afterwards, it just made me a little bit more motivated to kind of leave the world a little better for them. And all these concepts are really important because I think there's people who listen to my podcast probably every day who really need that reminder that, hey, you know what, like, don't get stuck in this just cycle of doing the same routine every day and doing the same thing every day. And you can do something, even if it seems small, even if it seems not important at the moment. Doing something is much better than doing nothing. And
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Just, you're looking for an outlet, like I said, to not just sit and stew and simmer about things, but try to find a way to do something that at least shares the truth with people and helps enlighten people.
And in regards to 9/11, was there any documentary or podcast or a book or research or anything that kind of sparked your interest in that specific topic?
Not really. It was really just from that ground up of hearing about this drive to declassify the 28 pages. So I had no special interest in 9/11 per se before this. Obviously, I realized its significance to the country, but it wasn't a topic that I had really delved deep into. But when Congressman Thomas Massey, he's from Kentucky, he's somebody who I'd already had some deep respect for before I saw that press conference. So when I saw him urging the release of these 28 pages, got my attention, and then it kind of went from there.
And for people listening who have heard conversations about the 28 pages but might not be familiar with the whole trying to get it declassified or released to the public, can you give just a brief description on what we're referring to?
You bet. Yeah, the 28 pages are a full chapter from the report of a joint congressional intelligence inquiry into 9/11. A lot of people, and you'll see even major media articles, describe the 28 pages as being from the 9/11 Commission report. That's not the case. They're from the report of this Joint Intelligence Committee inquiry that happened before the 9/11 Commission began. So this was a joint effort by the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to look into what the intelligence community did before and after 9/11, and look for having a deeper understanding of what their activities were, and to what extent they might have been tracking things, missing things, and so forth. So just putting that picture together. This report, the report where the pages are found in, is several hundred pages long, and as you'd expect with any kind of document dealing with intelligence and that type of thing, there are redactions all throughout that entire report. But those redactions are selective. They're a name here, a place there, a paragraph there, very selective. But where it came to this chapter, this entire chapter, the George W. Bush administration insisted on completely blanking out the entire chapter and sealing the entire thing from public view. Now, these 28 pages deal specifically with Saudi government links to the 9/11 attacks, to people associated with the attacks. They're basically a compilation and summary of investigative leads and research that had been done by the FBI and the intelligence community into these potential links between Saudi government officials, people believed to be operating on behalf of the Saudi government, and the hijackers themselves, and the support network that supported them when they were in the United States. And so immediately that classification was controversial. Senator Bob Graham, not to be confused with Lindsey Graham, Bob Graham, Democrat from Florida, was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and right away he was protesting that and urging that these pages be released, introducing resolutions even back in 2003 to start to light the fuse to get those pages released, and kind of relentlessly ever since then had been pushing for those pages to be released. And then it kind of that movement to declassify them started up again much bigger in 2013 and 14 with Congressman Walter Jones, specifically was the main spearhead from North Carolina. He died last year. Thomas Massie and Stephen Lynch from Massachusetts. They really kind of did a heavy, sustained effort, from their Capitol Hill positions to try to bring these pages about. And that's kind of where I came into the picture, and just trying to jump on board. It's kind of I describe it as a tug of war. It's just another pair of hands pulling, and helping to promote public awareness, and doing radio interviews and writing articles and this type of thing, and promoting public engagement on it. So the pages were then eventually declassified, not fully, still with redactions in the summer of 2016. Of course, the Bush administration had claimed that releasing them would, of course, damage national security, the usual excuse we hear. But once you look at the 28 pages, you can see that obviously they could have. It's clear that they could have been released in the form we see now. Way back then, obviously there were other motives for the Bush administration to keep those classified.
Yeah, and then also after learning about the Saudi connection, and I think many of us probably already assumed that anyways, that there's a Saudi connection and funding. There was a bill, the one that for the families of 9/11 that Obama didn't let pass and whatnot.
Right. Right.
That was important too. Can you get into that too, and what that bill was, and maybe
sure.
some of you, maybe your personal opinion on why you think there was issues with that bill?
Sure. Yeah, the law you're referring to is called JASTA for short. That's the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. And what it did was clear a hurdle that was blocking 9/11 families and survivors from proceeding with a lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for its alleged support of the hijacking plot. The general rule is that U.S. citizens can't sue foreign governments. This concept of sovereign immunity. There are exceptions to sovereign immunity, and so what this law did was to make clear that it didn't ever reference 9/11 specifically or anything. It's just kind of establishing an exception, and there are many exceptions, to that sovereign immunity, but an exception to where a foreign government is credibly accused of helping to support an attack that occurs on U.S. soil. Okay, so it allowed that to proceed. So this was the 9/11 families and survivors have for many years been pursuing this civil case. There's criminal law and there's civil law. If you think about, the listeners think about O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, but then he was found liable under a civil case. So that's what we're looking at here, is a civil case where the family members, survivors, are seeking civil damages from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so that lawsuit was in jeopardy because of the way judges had interpreted the sovereign immunity laws, to say that, you can't proceed. Well, JASTA cleared that hurdle, kind of made it unambiguous that under those types of circumstances it could. All up until, there was a multi-year effort to pass JASTA. And all along the way, you had the Saudi government, which is one of the most powerful, multifaceted lobbying organizations, in Washington, was working to block it from being passed. And then after it's passed, Obama vetoed it, and Congress overturned his veto. It was the only veto override of Obama's 2 terms in office. And following that, the Saudi lobbying machine didn't give up. They actually kicked into a much higher gear with a a very vigorous counterattack on the law from a legislative point of view, and tried to weaken it, water it down through amendments and that type of thing. And I'd reported extensively on that because there was a lot of, appears to be, blatant misconduct and violations of U.S. Foreign Agent Registration Act that surrounded that campaign to weaken the law. Which, by the way, never succeeded. The JASTA is on the books today, just as it was written and passed in 2016, and the 9/11 civil suit against Saudi Arabia is moving along at a glacial pace, as is the nature of a case like that, but it is grinding forward.
This is the thing about this topic, is that I remember getting conversations with people, and they'll use the argument or the case that we need to keep relationships with the Saudis for foreign policy reasons, for the betterment of the country. We have interest in doing so. But I mean, what's your opinion on why they have so much influence on our politics, why they have so much influence on our foreign policy? And what's your opinions on that type of conversation and discussion?
I mean, a lot of it is money, and it's a two-way flow. I mean, obviously there's our imports of oil, but of course we're not nearly as dependent, as we were 10, 20 years ago. But it's a two-way street, because Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest purchasers of weapons from the U.S. so-called defense industry. And so you've got a lot of people who have an interest in sustaining the status quo in U.S.-Saudi relations. And you've seen Trump kind of heralding the arms deals that he's promoting and cooking up, and talking about the jobs they create and so forth. This is kind of one example, but so you've got, just as we've seen with these weapon systems that are a bottomless pit, where we're throwing money into them, like fighter jets that don't work when it's raining outside. These they make a part in every district just about, and so you've got everybody with an interest in it. Well, that then leads to an interest in sustaining the U.S.-Saudi relationship, since they're buying a lot of those weapon systems. So that, and then it just all starts to form a web of money and influence. If you look at the major think tanks in Washington, when I talk about Saudi influence, it goes beyond that to others who, like I said, benefit from the Saudi relationship and want to keep that going. if you look at the big think tanks in Washington, one of the most respected in the foreign policy and defense sphere is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So Saudi Arabia is one of its benefactors, donating money to it, and it's definitely apparent in the type of work that CSI produces. So you've got, and not just Saudi Arabia funding it. If you look, you also see major funding from recognizable names from the defense industry, the military-industrial complex, and it flavors their research. It flavors what they do. They in turn are called to testify to Congress on policy. They influence. They're interviewed by journalists and looked at as these neutral academic types, when really that might be the case, but money influences people, even in subtle ways, not necessarily in a very sinister way, but it starts to move people in the way they talk about things, and the research they take on, and the way they pursue it. So, yeah, but one of the other question was, isn't a close U.S.-Saudi relationship in U.S. interest? I would say absolutely not. Everything starts to become circular logic. We're told that Iran is. We have to counter Iran because why? Well, it's a threat to Saudi Arabia. It's a threat to Israel. Then in turn, we're told that we have to support Israel and Saudi Arabia because they're threatened by Iran. Well, I mean, they all have their own interests, but it's not particularly in U.S. interest to invest so much time and money and potentially U.S. military lives in taking a side in those regional rivalries.
Yeah, the weird thing is that we're friends and do business with the Saudis and Israel, and they're both kind of implemented in 9/11. Obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the dancing in Israelis and the Mossad links and stuff like that. I mean, it's just, the whole thing just seems weird. It's weird that we, two enemies we're friends with, and two sides that have direct ties to some terrorist attacks and terrorist groups and stuff like that, and yet I mean, I'd like to believe it's as simple as just money. I mean, it just, obviously, like you said, money has a huge influence on what's going on. I've had Jack Abramoff on some years ago when he got out of prison and wrote the book about lobbying, and he it's quite obvious when you look at his history and what he was doing that if you have enough funds, it's amazing the influence you can have. And it's just it's scary. It's scary to think that, really, if you have enough, everything's kind of just a chessboard, and if it helps get to, whatever their end game is, if that's ultimate power or money, then they'll do it. It's not about ideology. It's not about human rights. It's not about what's moral or whatnot. It's all about just gaining more money and power. And if that means helping or working with somebody that at some point in the past or the future could be an enemy or do something against the American people, or they'll do it. And the whole thing just drives me crazy because people continue to justify that, like, oh, we have to be friends with Israel, we have to be friends with the Saudis because of this or because of that, and I'm not sure I buy into that.
Yeah, I mean, people say, well, we have to be friends with Saudi Arabia because it's an important partner in the war on terror. Well, here we've got, beyond the 20 pages, we've got other indications and evidence showing sustained Saudi government, Saudi royal family support of terrorism and extremism around the world. So, Trump, no matter what happened, no matter who's in the Oval Office, it's kind of like the same song and dance. No matter what they say before they get elected, once they're elected, they're all the same foreign policy, just about. I mean, obviously with leanings in certain directions. But I guess what I'm getting at is candidate Trump on the trail said, he was talking about the fact that we shouldn't have invaded Iraq, and he said, Iraq didn't knock down the world towers. There's some secret documents that might tell you that Saudi Arabia did. Okay, then he becomes President Trump, and he does the extraordinary thing of making his first foreign trip not to Mexico or Canada, as has been the long U.S. tradition, but to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the one that just months earlier he was pointing a 9/11 finger at, but now he gets elected and he's basically in their pocket on any policy they want, the war in Yemen, the Iran issue and everything else. We just really don't see that fundamental change no matter who takes over. So the influence is just very strong, and really not too many cracks in it, though. Although you do see now more congressional pushback on that relationship and wanting to throttle it down and ease back, and particularly in terms of things like the war in Yemen. Yeah, and I would also distinguish when people talk about national interests. I think there's national interests, what's in the interest of the American people, and there's government interests. And what the U.S. government consistently pursues is government interests, the interest of the governmental entity, of the bureaucracies, of the CIA. The CIA has a very close relationship with Saudi intelligence. They want to keep that going at any cost, even if it means concealing and papering over links between the royal family and the 9/11 attacks. That's fine. So the mission of any bureaucrat, whether it's a Department of Motor Vehicles or the CIA, is to increase the budget, increase their power, increase their influence. That's the top mission. Everything else is kind of subsidiary to that. That's what you see playing out in this arena too.
Yeah, it's weird because even with Trump, you saw a huge shift in his opinions after getting in office, and I didn't, and I don't think a lot of people kind of felt like he was saying the things he was saying in the debates and prior to becoming president because he was motivated in getting votes. It almost seems like he was doing kind of everything against the grain, and it worked because it was against the grain, and people kind of wanted to hear that. And he gets in office, and he, like you said, foreign policy doesn't change. Everything is exactly the way it was. The bombing in Syria, they trying to get involved in Venezuela. It's amazing. It makes you wonder, like, one, how much power does the president really have? And I constantly say I don't think he has much power at all. I think it's just like, it's some PR firm that's hired to kind of just put out or to affect public perception, but there's not really much power behind that because there's so many moving parts and so many just advisors and people that have been around and have such influence. And do you tend to subscribe to that? Do you believe that it's just one of those things where the president just doesn't have a lot of power, or do you really do think once they get in power? Because some people have made the argument, well, once you realize how all the reasonings and all the justifications on why you can or cannot do something, it's more about you have certain positions prior to becoming the president because you're ignorant. You just don't have the advisors to inform you, the generals to inform you on why this needs to be done or that can't be done or whatnot. And then once you get that information, that's what changes your opinions. What do you think?
Well, I think we have to put ourselves in the shoes of a new president. No matter what they're doing, it's probably nothing on the scale of what we have come to expect the U.S. chief executive to do. Let's say you're a governor of a state or in Trump's case, a businessman. All of a sudden, you're now responsible for touching every aspect of American life and running the entire rest of the world, right, through foreign policy. And so I think there's a great deal of intimidation that comes in that. And so you step into that Oval Office and you're getting eye-opening briefings from the CIA, speaking to you with great confidence, but maybe not full honesty about a lot of things. And I think it's a natural tendency for these people to kind of bend to the weight of that entrenched establishment and the status quo and the way things have been done, and to keep it going. So I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think the presidency does have power, but I think it's very intimidating for chief executives. Not, from the complexity of what they're presented with, just from that point of view, and also, of course, the intelligence community is a pretty worrisome entity to have on your bedside. It's been, I think, well documented that Hoover kept files on politicians so that he basically had dirt on politicians all around Washington that would help nudge them to adopt whatever policies he wanted to relative to the FBI. I think I remember seeing an anecdote where he contacted a member of Congress and said, "Hey, I understand your daughter had an abortion. I just want you to know, I'm going to keep that confidential." That type of thing. I don't think I have the exact anecdote right, but something along those lines. I think between all that intimidation of the intimidation of being overwhelmed by all this and wanting to lean on all these people, and the intimidation of the notion of daring to go against what the intelligence community wants, I think it intimidates presidents into pulling back and going along with the way things are done.
Yeah, I think that definitely can be a part of it, but there's so many moving parts and so many just influencers in the background, who
Right.
gave them their money, like you talked about in the beginning of the conversation about just the influence of money. I mean, the Mercers who gave Trump tons of money. I mean, there's tons of people who help and are going to have some influence on what's going on. And you see with the Epstein case, just how connected so many people are, and so many other. I feel like there's so much more going on behind the scenes, and a lot of things that seem like a spy novel or, for a lack of a better term, conspiracy theories. I think with the Epstein case, it's kind of making the most skeptical people a little bit more open-minded to the fact that there is, a shadow government or a deep state or whatever you want to call it, some type of behind-the-scenes influence on what's going on. And I think people kind of fall for the reality TV stuff. To me, it's very similar to reality TV. It's like people watch reality TV. Even though in the back of their minds they know it's scripted and fake, they still get caught up in the characters and what they're saying and what's going on. And deep inside, they want to believe that there's some reality to this. And I think politics is very similar, where it's you watch the TV, you hear some politician explain himself on why he voted for this or didn't vote for that, or why he took money from them and whatnot, and or the justification for some some war, some unjustified war, and we want to believe that this is their honest opinions and they're telling us the truth. And behind the scenes, behind the curtains, there's all these moving parts and the real reasons on why we do things. I mean, look at, and this conversation is really about September 11th, and September 11th is kind of the perfect example of how emotionally everybody was so upset and angry and felt like we needed to do something after September 11th. And it was a perfect way of getting people to get involved in a war and invade a country that had nothing to do with the attacks. And now we have the longest running war in American history, Afghanistan, which most people have no idea, most Americans couldn't even find on a map. Don't know why we're there. But yet there's people coming back to the country, coming back to the U.S. with PTSD, with lost limbs, with all types of medical issues because of it. You look at, Iraq, similar situation. I mean, just the amount of money that went to like KBR and Hollenberg and all these private contractors, Lockheed Martin, all these people who made all this money, and yet, they had nothing to do with September 11th. We're sold a book of lies with the weapons of mass destruction. And I feel like we have horrendous long-term memory where just like quickly again we'll be caught up in getting involved in Syria, and we'll get involved in Venezuela or wherever the next country may be, Iran, and we'll fall for these just this propaganda of like, hey, this is why we need to go there, and or this country's communist and that's why we need to go there, or this country is a threat, or China's a threat. It's like we constantly need a boogeyman. We constantly need a justification. And it's like I forget which guest said it once. It's like the guy who makes umbrellas prays for rain. Well, the people who make bombs pray for war. And when you have tons of money, you don't have to pray for it. You can actually influence it. And you see that over and over again. And it's a huge issue. I mean, foreign policy is one of those topics that really motivate me, because I feel like it's too often people can go on with their lives. They go to work, they come home, they pick up the kids, they go to the gym, they go to a grocery store, make dinner. They can go on with their lives. And if we're in Afghanistan or we're not in Afghanistan, it doesn't change their lives that much. If we're in Syria, if we're not in Syria, if we're influencing, elections all over the world or not, it doesn't affect as much. But it does affect those people who live there, those people who are dealing with the bombs or dealing with the rebels who are getting American weapons. And I feel like it's really easy just to forget that we're involved all over the world, and we're influencing so much horror and violence that's going on all over the world. And I think these conversations need to continuously happen, and we constantly need these reminders that, hey, this stuff is going on. And it's not just going on, it's going on with the justification that we're trying to make the world a better place, and it's going on with your tax money. And so I think is that one of the things that kind of bothers you about foreign policy, and maybe people kind of not, it seems like it's not a topic that's quite as sexy to a lot of people. I mean, I have had people like Scott Horton, which, you've been a guest on his show, and constantly talking about foreign policy. And I love people like him who are constantly talking about what's going on and very anti-war. And I think it's really hard to get people motivated about being anti-war when we're kind of detached from it, right? We're not really, the news isn't talking about it. The people aren't talking about it on the radio. People aren't, it's just like it's happening, but there's not a whole lot of conversation about it.
Right. And, you talk about there being not much focus or attention on foreign policy. I think one of the greatest indications of that is if you've been watching the Democratic debates, they'll have, 2.5 hours or whatever, how long that is. And then, at the very end, but, every time so far, it's been kind of pushed towards the very end after a lot of people have tuned out. And then they'll hit some token foreign policy issues. But they're usually, it's a light treatment of one topic. There's nothing very deeply controversial that's been brought up. And traditionally people would think, the Democratic Party, that's the anti-war party. Obviously that's not the case in many ways, but branding wise, a lot of people would think historically that's, over the past couple decades, you'd think that maybe they're lean that way, but it's kind of all out the window. Other than maybe Tulsi Gabbard, amongst the 20 candidates or whatever, there's pretty much nobody really challenging the basic premise of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, and on it goes. And you talked too about, or I mentioned a little while ago about how the 9/11 attacks were kind of this perfect excuse to start a war and to do something, and that kind of gets back to why I launched 28pages.org. It was, 28 pages basically underscore the profound hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. government messaging on foreign relations. What I'm getting at specifically is, as you alluded to, at the very same time the U.S. government was cultivating in the collective American mind this image of Saddam Hussein being linked to 9/11. The very same time they're doing that, the government is concealing 28 pages of investigative links 6 ways from Sunday, tying suspicious characters and the 9/11 hijackers to Saudi government officials, the Saudi embassy in Washington, and most spectacularly of all, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, Prince Bandar. The 20 pages revealed direct cash payments from Prince Bandar to a extremist in Southern California who reportedly bragged to a source of all the assistance he gave to two of the future 9/11 hijackers. Now, that was concealed. That is what George Bush did not want out back in 2003. This is during the run-up, 2002, 2003. This is during the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. And if listeners go to 28pages.org, they can find an article where I interviewed Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, he was chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. And, his observations kind of confirmed, that very premise. He says, those 20 pages were kept silent because it would have undermined the march to war. It would have undermined this narrative. If all of a sudden you had splashy headlines about Saudi government links to 9/11, people would say, well, what the heck are we doing focusing our attention on Iraq? As the Iraq war began, I think the polls showed that 60% of Americans felt there was a link between Saddam Hussein and the 9/11 attacks. There was no link between them whatsoever. But as Rahm Emanuel said during the great financial crisis in 2006 and 7, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, it's the same philosophy back in after September 11th. Don't let this crisis go to waste. On the very morning of the attacks, you had Donald Rumsfeld walking around the outside of the Pentagon, and his aides taking notes of what he's telling them to do. And the notes say, look for links to Saddam, go big, sweep it all up. I'm paraphrasing, but go big was one of the words. Go big, sweep it all up, whether related or not, which I thought would be the title of a good title for a book or an essay, but whether related or not, that says everything. About the opportunism and the fact that 9/11 was exploited to kind of unleash an agenda that was, on the minds of a lot of interventionists in terms of trying to remake the Middle East entirely.
Yeah, and it's not a coincidence that Project for a New American Century, and which was founded by Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, and Dick Cheney, all talked about looking for a justification. They needed a new Pearl Harbor, which is actually a great documentary on 9/11, 9/11, A New Pearl Harbor. And it's, they needed a new Pearl Harbor to kind of justify having an influence in the Middle East and expanding our military. And they got it. And, we can debate, a lot of people can and they've had debates if they just kind of took advantage, like you said, they took advantage of what happened, or if they actually had a hand in it or let it happen or whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think what happened after September 11th is proof that obviously the people of America wasn't their most important thing to them. It was about getting into the Middle East. It was about because you look at how, the idea that there was morals or they cared and they were just kind of taking advantage of a bad thing because they didn't want it to go to waste, like you said, like that famous quote. I don't think it matters that much, because it shows that, like, okay, if you believe that it was just the hijackers, or if you believe that the government kind of neglected some evidence that they knew it was going to happen or whatnot, either way, it's obvious that they didn't, they let thousands of people die, even if it wasn't on September 11th. It was after September 11th, by getting involved in Iraq, by getting involved in Afghanistan, and spending tons of taxpayers' resources and
trillions,
trillions. I mean, and then never mind that, like the day before September 11th, when the Pentagon admits that they lost, I forget, $19 trillion or whatnot. So we lose all this money prior to September 11th. Then after September 11th, we spend all this money, on these reckless wars. So it's like, it's crazy. It's right. I forget what.
In response to the death toll of 9/11, I mean, if you look at the death toll associated with our response to 9/11. It's it's so many more. I mean, and I'm talking about the human death toll, not necessarily just the American ones. If you look at the ongoing effects of the invasion of Iraq, which you can link directly to the rise of ISIS and Syria, and what we've done since then in terms of fomenting unrest and rebellion in Syria and everything. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of people and migrants, and you look at the migrant crisis in Europe, and you see so many shallow thinking, shallow understanding people on social media or whatever saying, oh, those people, they're leaving their hellhole countries. Well, and fleeing, to the West. Well, and invading the West was like, well, you have to understand this migration wave. Libya, much of it is the direct result of U.S. and Western NATO foreign policy causing that. So, I mean, the human suffering and the human toll is incredible, and goes multitudes and magnitudes beyond the day that sparked it all.
Well, that's the crazy part of it, is that it always amazes me when you see the same people in the same countries that created this mess complain about these people coming to their country. It's like you said, yeah, these foreigners that are invading your country are coming to your country because you invaded their country, and now their country's a mess. Because most foreigners would if they had an option, they'd rather be in their country. They love their culture, they love their friends and family and the place they grew up in. And a lot of times leaving is a last resort because it's unstable, there's no work, or it's dangerous, or whatever it may be. So it's not just as simple as like, okay, Western countries are so awesome, everybody just wants to leave their country and go to it, because a lot of times they do deal with racism, or they deal with, people from those countries that maybe don't want them there. So Libya is a perfect example, because Libya is a complete disaster that nobody talks about anymore. And
right.
It was a country that was doing quite well, and we take down Gaddafi, or we help in the process, and now the country's a complete mess, and there's human sex slaves and human trafficking and all this craziness going on in Libya, and yet we don't want to take any responsibility for it. And then when those people are leaving and trying to go to a Western country, a NATO country, where we're like, oh, what are we going to do with all these people? Who's responsible for all these people? And there's all this debate on if they should take them in or not. And it's wild. I don't know if it was Bernie Sanders or Andrew Yang who, when they were talking about running for president and some of their policies and stuff they want to change in the country. And they made a really good point. I forget which one it was, but they said something like, because they're like, oh, they always ask, how are you going to pay for that? I don't know if it was Bernie Sanders and he was talking about some socialist program like free school or whatnot, or if it was Andrew Yang doing the universal basic income. But they responded with saying, well, nobody ever asks, how do we pay for that war? And it was a great line, and I wish I could give credit to whoever said it. But the point is, like, it's true. Like, we get involved in wars all the time, and never once do we ask, how are we going to pay for this? It's always just like, we have to get involved, and that's it. The money just comes out of nowhere,
Well, I mean, people, you said they're indifferent to foreign policy. I mean, everybody's pretty much gotten completely indifferent to the fact that we've got $22 trillion in debt compounding as we speak. So it's the same thing. I just put it on the tab. I mean, everybody's pretty much indifferent to all that spending and all that cost. But you're right, Libya is a perfect example. And it's I mean, it was basically Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's mini Iraq. It wasn't a U.S. invasion, but in terms of an absolute foreign policy disaster characterized by a dishonest narrative to get public opinion in support of it and so forth. It's the same thing, and the same thing in terms of then unleashing a humanitarian crisis that then washes onto the shores of Western nations, literally and tragically sometimes washing on their shores. And then life goes on, and and then the Democratic Party was behind Hillary Clinton, and you had progressives behind her, and I know a lot of them who you bring up foreign policy and their eyes just kind of glaze over because all they care about is promises of free education or whatever else the giveaway is. But foreign policy takes that back seat.
Yeah, it does, because like I mentioned, because the news doesn't do what they should be doing, and that's reporting on this stuff. And that's why most people who are from other countries are more informed and better informed about American policy and what's going on in the world than Americans are, because they're watching, maybe Sky News or RT or Al Jazeera or whatever. And even though all these news stations and they all, BBC, whatever it may be, they all have some opinion and they do probably have some influence on what they report or don't report, but they report on what's going on in the world in regards to American foreign policy much more than Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, who just wants to argue about, you're either pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and that's basically all you see on TV.
Yeah, it's talking heads bantering. Yeah. Versus reporting. Al Jazeera, you'll see on-the-ground reporters in the Crimea or wherever the spot might be, but you don't see that in Western media anymore. It's pretty much studio talking heads and the occasional reporter repeating what the Pentagon or the CIA or the FBI told them. And that they're not journalists, they're stenographers. They're just recording and passing on what the government pronouncements are unquestioningly. Yeah.
You ever go down any of the rabbit holes of do you focus on more just the 28 pages and the kind of stuff that you can improve, or have you dove into some of the other stuff? What's your personal opinion on 9/11? Do you think it was a government cover up? Do you think that it was just a tragedy that they took advantage of? Do you have an opinion on that? Before doing 20 pages, like I said, I had not studied much about 9/11, but then I began reading, many books and so forth on 9/11, and, running a social media account, you can't then help but have everybody haranguing you with their own pet theories and angles and that type of thing. My general, first of all, I think we don't know everything we need to know about 9/11. So anybody who says, oh, I know A to Z what that was all about. I guess one of the things I found when I started to go into the 20 pages and started to learn more about 9/11 was the vast tapestry that is 9/11. All the different aspects of it. And so, as far as other rabbit holes, I haven't really gone down any other rabbit holes. I'd say my general, belief is that, this was an Al-Qaeda attack motivated by Al-Qaeda's perception of and resentment of U.S. foreign policy, to include intervention in the Middle East, to include its blank check support of the Israeli government, of Al-Qaeda's and these extremist perception that U.S. foreign policy causes suffering of their fellow Muslims throughout the Middle East, in Palestine and Iraq, and U.S. sanctions and all this type of thing. I think it'll help motivate them to do these attacks. I think it's well documented that the Saudi government has and continues to fund extremism. And we could talk about why they do that in a little bit if you'd like to. But so I'd say that's my general thing. I do want to make one point. Earlier, you said you mentioned Israel being implicated in 9/11. I wouldn't personally say we know enough to go so far as to use the word implicated. You mentioned the dancing Israelis, and for listeners, that's a reference to Israeli citizens working for a company called Urban Moving Systems, who were observed appearing in a celebratory mode, taking pictures with the World Trade Center behind them, apparently starting to do so after the first plane and before the second one. That's very eyebrow raising. To me, it does cause
a deep interest in wanting, more information about that to be released and declassified. I think even if you think that those people might have had foreknowledge of 9/11, that doesn't necessarily equate to Israel being an organizing entity of 9/11. I think there's a lot of indications that those people were associated with Israeli intelligence. Were they possibly tracking the hijackers and maybe knew something was about to happen? Possibly. Again, that's an open question. So I'm not in a camp of saying Israel did 9/11. And by the way, I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't say I'm in a camp of saying Saudi Arabia did 9/11. I guess I'll get to what I was alluding to earlier. My belief is not that the Saudi government said, we want the World Trade Center to come down. Instead, what you've got is a Saudi royal family that, to perpetuate its power at home and to keep extremism from shaking the foundation of their very comfortable lives, ruling Saudi Arabia, they encourage those extremists to take out their actions and take out their frustrations and do it abroad. I think it's a pretty explicit deal between Al Qaeda and Saudi royals that look, don't cause trouble at home, and we'll fund you abroad. And and giving money to fund extremism and madrasas around the world is a way for the Saudi royals to try to demonstrate to others that they are truly bona fide Muslims adhering to this very conservative Salafist strain of Islam. Of course, they're not faithful adherents to that. The Salafist philosophy. If you look at Bin Laden, it's one that espouses a very modest lifestyle. Bin Laden, living in a cave and so forth. He would go out and go without water for a lot of time. Self-denial and so forth. Contrast that with Saudi royals with these enormous yachts and estates in London and rich lifestyles with alcohol and everything else. They're not real. There's a lot of resentment, of that by the really traditional adherents of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. And so to counter that and to show, hey, no, we're the real thing, it influences the Saudi royals to fund extremism so that they can say, look, we're bona fide, look what we're helping to support. So my impression from studying this is that you had the Saudi royals and Saudi government officials helping Al Qaeda, but not necessarily directing, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that because there's so many questions and so many of them haven't been answered, it's kind of like, it reminds me of like the JFK assassination. It's like, we know there's people who could be involved. We know there's a lot of question marks, but we can't pinpoint exactly, definitely who's to blame or what exactly their roles were. And I know James Corbett did a great video, 9/11 suspects and dancing Israelis, and you can Google that if they still let you find it, because I know that they're having a lot of censorship on what you can and cannot find. But on his website, corbettreport.com, you'll find it, and he goes in depth a little more about them and stuff. But I think 9/11, yeah, it's one of those cases that there's a lot of dots that you can connect, but I don't think the picture is completely clear on what happened or how it happened. I mean, you look at people who made profit, the inside trading, you look at all the war games, you look at so many different aspects, so many just really weird and unusual things that have to be more than a coincidence. And I think you can kind of figure out, okay, there's definitely more than meets the eye, but I think when it's all said and done, it's hard to know who had the biggest influence on what happened, and was it let happen, was it planned, all those things that I think aren't ever 100% figured out, because again, a lot of this, the evidence was destroyed. There was obviously a cover up for whatever reason, who they were covering it up for, I don't know. But you look at the commission report. I mean, it was complete BS. You look at just, how many restrictions they had on, if it wasn't for the Jersey women, if you the widows, the four widows, who pushed for the commission report, they weren't even going to investigate it, and they still spend more money investigating Bill Clinton's cheating than they did on 9/11. And then they had restrictions on, that Cheney and Bush wouldn't go under oath. They wouldn't be questioned alone. I think originally they were supposed to have Henry Kissinger, who has obviously,
Right.
a very horrendous past of historical past in regards to foreign policy, and had him, and then the women asked if he had any ties to the Bin Ladens, and then that's when he kind of dropped out. And
Well, the ladies say he literally dropped his coffee.
Yeah.
When they asked him that or spat.
But isn't that another perfect example of how they weren't trying ever to find anything or
right.
or I mean they knew. I mean, obviously people who decided that Henry Kissinger should be a part of investigating 9/11, they knew he had Bin Laden ties. I mean, you look at the Carlyle group, you look at the Bushes linked to the Carlyle group and the Bin Ladens linked to Carlyle group. I mean, they did business together. All the planes when they were grounded, they had just the one plane to get the one of the Bin Laden brothers or family members out of the U.S. So I mean, it's quite obvious that like they never really cared to. I mean, and the fact that they just started getting rid of all the evidence, I mean, and then you look at just the people you want to talk about. Immediately, you had the people who died in the building and all the people related to that. But what about all the first responders when they were lied to about the quality of air?
Right.
It's well documented that they lied about it. People are having really bad health effects just because they were out there trying to help people, and so many people who I know people who traveled, and I live in Ludlow, Massachusetts, near Springfield, Massachusetts, and I know people from around this area, from Western Mass, that traveled to go help, and these people they're put in danger because of lack of information and knowingly put in danger. And so it's just, nobody ever checked for explosives. I mean, they found a passport of one of the hijackers, but yet they never found the black boxes, which is, I think funny, and sad. I mean, it's just quite obvious that there's more to the story. And the whole thing, I mean, it really is like my generation's JFK. And I think hopefully the Epstein story is even a younger generation's JFK in regards to kind of opening people's eyes on what's possible and the fact that maybe things aren't exactly what they seem. And, if there's any good, I always say, like, the one good thing that comes from a funeral is that it puts in perspective, and it's a reminder that, hey, tomorrow's not guaranteed, and don't take every day, don't take any day for granted, because I think we get used to waking up every day, and we kind of do start taking it for granted until you have that reminder that, holy shit, like, I can die, and this does happen, and I'm not going to live forever. And I think 9/11 was horrific and tragic, and obviously one of the worst American tragedies, or maybe historically in any country, one of the worst tragedies. And but the one good thing is that a lot of people like myself, it kind of made us motivated and made us rethink what we thought we knew. And I think, at least that one positive thing came out of it, where it did motivate people like you and motivated people like me. I know people like James Corbett and many others that really went down that rabbit hole of 9/11 and started doing all this research and realizing, like, holy shit, like, there's absolutely more to this story. The story we were told doesn't make any sense. There's all these other things, and it's just, it's crazy because you watch the 9/11 videos of the towers coming down or people jumping out of the building, and it still has a emotional effect on me. Like the day it happened, it
Right.
still bothers me equally as much. And I think it's unfortunate that I hope it doesn't become one of those historical events that just kind of is looked at as, okay, it happened, it was in the past, and it just becomes another chapter in the history books, but it's
Yeah,
not.
well, it feels that way. You said, it's your generation's JFK, but look, that's not even resolved, right? And
You're
how
right. Yeah.
insane is it that the same giant cloak of secrecy and classification you have around 9/11 still hangs over the shooting of a president? How many years is that? 59 years ago, right? No, 50, help me, 57 years?
Yeah.
Um,
It
yeah.
happened in what was it?
Roughly 56, 57 years ago. And that's deemed still too sensitive to be, what, there's no rational reason why a shooting in Dallas from that many years ago would still have a cloak of secrecy around it, unless there's maybe some more substance to it. But if indeed 9/11 is this generation's JFK, then that's a bad omen, because it would mean 40 years from now, people would still be having the same conversation in the face of a wall of classification, and you're just leaving people to speculate and wonder and try to piece things together. So, so 20 pages wasn't a project I approached with a great deal of optimism, far-reaching optimism. It was a project that I guess it was attractive in the fact that it seemed kind of modest. Hey, let's just get these 28 pages out and then, see what they can add to the discussion. But fundamentally, declassifying 9/11 or changing U.S. foreign policy is a lot more daunting. But at least along the way, we can do whatever effort we can to help people appreciate the truth and appreciate there's a lot they don't know about U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
And how that foreign policy comes back to jeopardize American lives in the United States.
Yeah, and the fact that you look at the countries that get attacked by terrorists, it's France, it's England, it's the U.S., it's countries that are involved in these, in these conflicts. It's not a coincidence that that's where people are going to get revenge or attempting to get the revenge. It's so it puts us all in danger.
Exactly.
So
it's not just the United States government. Oh, they're doing something overseas, and that's what people don't appreciate is to the average person, 9/11 was an attack out of the blue. Wow, the United States minding its own business, and these evil creatures from abroad attacked out of nowhere and for no reason. Obviously, they were not morally justified in what they did, not even close to being morally justified. However, they had motivations that led to their perception of the effects of U.S. foreign policy on the people in their part of the world. That does not morally justify killing innocents here. But interesting. A lot of times you see Americans not knowingly they embrace the logic of Al Qaeda, the ethics code of Al Qaeda. They think, well, it's okay to kill innocent people in the Middle East because they kill innocent people here. Well, that's Al Qaeda's belief. They said, okay, the U.S. foreign policy caused the death of people in Iraq during sanctions, therefore we're justified in killing innocent people in the United States. Both people embracing that philosophy are absolutely morally empty and operating on an empty moral tank and are totally unjustified in those positions. Everybody is an individual. And so the individuals who are going to work in the towers that day obviously had no attachment to U.S. foreign policy and didn't deserve to suffer for U.S. foreign policy. But it's, we fool ourselves when we disconnect them. And I think when George Bush took to the airwaves on the night of 9/11 from the Oval Office, it all began with a lie, that speech. The first thing he said was, my fellow Americans, freedom came under attack today. And off we went, with this idea that we were being attacked because the United States was being attacked because of some resentment of our lifestyle, or that Saudi extremists were resentful that women had the right to vote. That is preposterous. That's not what motivated them. It's not to say that their actions were justified in even one scintilla, but we have to understand the fact that U.S. foreign policy stirs anger that comes back to be unleashed on innocent U.S. citizens who are just trying to go about their lives. And when you see the United States refueling Saudi jets that are attacking Yemen and causing a giant humanitarian crisis there, we all have to hold our breath knowing this is going to cause another wave of resentments about what the United States role is, the United States government's role in that region, and that it imperils every one of us.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it was Vice or which article, or who wrote the article about how, every drone attack, can potentially create this many terrorists. And, I use the example sometimes with people, because there was some years ago where they were reporting on this a little more, the drone attacks in Yemen, and they were reporting that, like, we accidentally killed, like, a wedding party, and we accidentally then killed these people, and we killed that people. And I tell people, I'm like, listen, if that was you at a loved one's wedding, or even worse, it was your wedding, and a drone attack from a foreign country, so put yourself in their shoes. You're in America, you're at a wedding, and some Russian or Chinese drone comes and kills all your loved ones. You're probably going to make your life goal to get revenge on whoever was responsible for that attack. And
right.
So it's not hard to understand how our foreign policy, or, us meddling all over the world, can potentially make us more unsafe, and we think that we're, and that's the other thing too. It's like, it's like people are constantly thanking our troops and all this stuff, and I feel bad for our troops, because I think a lot of them truly believe that, they believe the lie that they've been sold, that they're going to do these things for, for their loved ones back at home, and so we can live the lives that we live, and for a safer America, and all this, nonsense, when really a lot of what they're doing is creating a less safe America by getting involved. And
right, I don't want to thank a veteran for going to Iraq. Okay, I want to apologize that, back then, in that frame of mind that I was in, I was like, okay, I guess we need to go to Iraq and invade Iraq. I want to apologize that I wasn't a voice against them being sent there. I want to apologize because they should have never been sent there. So yeah, gratitude in that situation isn't, like you said, it's not the emotion I feel. I feel bad that they were sent there, and they certainly, by going there, made the Middle East and the world a less safe place, which is not what a lot of people enlisted because of 9/11, and then they're sent there, to do something totally unrelated that only made the world a more dangerous place. And so yeah, I understand exactly that same. And I'm an Army veteran, so I'm coming from that type of a position. Obviously, I appreciate deeply the motives and what inspires service members to join and want to serve the country, but I deeply resent the fact that the U.S. government just exploits that and uses it to do whatever they want to do with them. And you talk about how troops are feeling about things. I just had an interesting conversation with a soldier who recently redeployed back from a deployment to Iraq, and I said, "What's the general feeling amongst people being deployed over there?" As this person said, "So the general feeling is, why are we here?" It wasn't a sense of motivation or, wow, we're really doing something important. What are we doing here? It was more of a sense of bewilderment that this is still going on. We still got troops in Iraq. They don't know what they're doing. This was a a type of a support unit supporting other troops. They had no idea what those other troops were doing or why, and it was just let's get through this thing and get back home. It wasn't, wow, we're on the front lines of freedom or anything even close to that.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably a common theme, and I'm not surprised to hear that you're a veteran. I don't think my listeners are either, because some of the most anti-war people are people who have actually enlisted and then realize, like, holy crap, I've been sold a book of lies. And, you see it with, the historic example is Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler, who wrote the
Right.
book War is a Racket. And it's important, I think that what you do is really important. These discussions are super important. I think people, like we said in the beginning of this conversation, foreign policy is not a sexy topic because it's not in the news. It doesn't seem like it affects your everyday life, and we never talk about how we can afford it. The money. It's just like we just do it and it happens, and we just go on with our lives. But like we also discussed, it does make us more unsafe. It does have some effects on our everyday lives, even if we don't understand how it's doing it. And it's important for us to discuss it and remind people that these conflicts are happening, these wars are happening, and also remind people that 100% of the time we're being lied to for the reasons why we're actually getting involved in these countries in the first place. So I think that's really important, because we tend to believe that, oh, well, this time maybe we should get involved, or maybe it's like,
Right.
I use the example, I'm like, if you keep catching your girlfriend cheating on you, let's just, next time she comes home or super late and she wasn't picking up the phone when you were calling her, wouldn't you assume that she, something shysty is going on? You wouldn't, to me, it's like you're innocent until proven guilty, and until we catch you a bunch of times. Now you're guilty until proven innocent. It's like once we
Right.
catch you lying a bunch of times, now you're guilty till proven innocent. And that's the way we should look at our foreign policy and the lies we're told about it, is that we should assume they're lying now.
That's right.
And until
I've called it McGlinchey's law, which is any pronouncement by the United States government on foreign policy or national security should be assumed false unless proven otherwise. That should be the presumption, because when you look back through everything we're told about foreign policy and every spark for every war, as you keep going back, it's lie after lie after lie. Libya was that Gaddafi was going to basically unleash a genocide and slaughter people. There's you go back, there's no indication he was going to do that. The Iraq War, WMD, that's not true. Syria, the chemical weapons attacks, scrutinize those. I don't believe that the Syrian government, on the verge of winning this war, or at various times, on the eve of a UN commission arriving in the country, had any interest or that it unleashed a chemical attack on its own citizens. Vietnam, on and on and on. Even the first Gulf War, we were told that we had to intervene because the Saddam's tanks were poised and ready to attack Saudi Arabia. Somebody hired a Russian satellite, and they weren't in any kind of attack position. It was just standard defend what they grab position. So every war that we've been sold since the sinking of in the Cuba harbor, the
Gulf of Tonkin, or
no, I'm going way back to the Spanish-American War.
the U.S. Maine.
Right. It's all, every pretext for a war has pretty much been a lie. So, but yeah, that should be the presumption, just like you said, that you should have proof of something else. But unfortunately, for the U.S. population, and even more unfortunately for the U.S. media, government pronouncements are assumed to be true and assumed to be kind of a gold standard, when it should be precisely the opposite.
Yeah, and I've had Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on my show too, and I know he is. I don't know if we talked about it on my show, or I've seen him on other interviews talk about the anthrax and some of the other the weapons of mass destruction, some of the stuff that was used to kind of promote and scare people into getting involved in in these other countries and to expand the empire. And we have to remember these things. I mean, even the anthrax thing, Robbie Martin, who is Abby Martin's
Right.
brother, he did a great documentary some years ago called, I think it's called American Anthrax, and I know it was available on YouTube. You'd probably still find it somewhere online. And just the fact that it was quite obvious they were using this anthrax thing to just scare the shit out of the public. It's same thing with, like, I don't know if you recall the whole, like, code red, code orange, like that was happening nonstop. All these things, like, you go back now and you connect the dots and, like, oh, I get it. Like, they were just trying to scare us. They were trying to get us to emotionally react. And it worked. And, because we were scared. We had 9/11 happen. We had the anthrax stuff. We had, code orange, code red. We could have a terrorist attack at any moment. Everybody was scared for their lives. So it was a perfect opportunity to say, hey, we got to do something about this.
Right.
And so it's like, we have to, and these things have to be constantly reminded. We have to remember these things over and over again. So, and then we don't get fooled with the same tricks, that they will go to the extent of lying about weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons and all this stuff. I mean, it's they'll scare the public into just agreeing that we have to do something. And I think it's unfortunate, but most people are too busy to do any research, or too busy and now it's even harder to do any research because now it's all controlled. I mean, YouTube, like some of the stuff that I'm even referencing, if I was doing this podcast even 6 months ago, you could just go on YouTube and find these things. But now I don't know if you can find American Anthrax. I don't know if you can find any of James Corbett's videos that easily on YouTube without, really going, maybe putting in the exact search or maybe going down a couple pages, because it's all, the narrative is all controlled. And
and Google's trying to steer. I think I don't know if you've seen recently some of these side-by-side comparisons people are doing of Google search and, let's say, a DuckDuckGo search. Like if you type Hillary and, on Google, it's, a bunch of benign topics. On DuckDuckGo, it's more of the intriguing ones that people are actually trying to search for. But it's kind of insidious to see Google, which is supposed to just facilitate search, right? Help you find what you're looking for. But instead, you see them trying to chaperone the citizenry and guide them. Oh, you don't want to look over here. Look over this way. Let's keep you away from these dangerous thoughts that question narratives and question your belief in the establishment.
In theory, the idea of, let's filter out the nonsense and try to get you to the correct information and help you find it easier makes sense. But the thing is, only in a perfect world where people don't have opinions or agendas, and people do have opinions and people do have agendas, and people do push those opinions and agendas. And behind these Silicon Valley companies are people with opinions and agendas. And even if they don't have opinions and agendas, they're influenced by the CIA or the government or whoever that does have a agenda. So it's, anytime you have anybody deciding for you what is the truth or what is a fact, then I think there's the issue. Case in point is Facebook, as they decide, we've got to stamp out fake news and all this sort of thing. Who do they engage to decide what's fake news? The Atlantic Council, right? Yeah.
Which is a staunchly pro-NATO, pro-military-industrial complex, pro-establishment, status quo entity. It's going to decide whether, this is a great topic, whether it's fake news or not that the Saudi government and Saudi royalty might have been linked to 9/11. No, you don't want to look at that. It's them deciding who's going to do that. So who curates the curators? So it's very troubling. It's almost like the internet, to me, kind of had this great awakening. It was the greatest thing, and now it's like this flame that's starting to flicker now. I think it's still hugely powerful in terms of finding and gaining information, but now there's kind of the shadow coming across it, in that where it was just before this neutral platform to share ideas, now you've got all these entities trying to chaperone the citizenry and what they're reading and what they look at and what they think. And so it's a little disheartening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the internet was where we went to get alternative perspectives and opinions from the mainstream media. Now you go on the internet and the only opinion and perspective you're getting is from the mainstream media. If I type in Epstein or 9/11 on YouTube or Google, a year ago I would get all these people in their basement who were just obsessed with this research and would create a documentary, and I might run into it, and I might find some really crappy documentary, or I might find something that's quite interesting. But either way, I have access to it, and now you don't. Now the only thing that comes up is CNN, MSNBC, New York Post, whatever it may be. It's like Washington Times. It's like all just articles from mainstream media. It's like, well, if I want to watch a documentary on reptilians, I should be able to find it. Even if I want to watch a documentary on the Earth being flat, it's I had this. I forget who I had the discussion with recently. I'm like, listen, you don't have to agree with the Earth being flat, but people should have access to it. I mean, if somebody wants to watch a documentary making that argument, you should have the right to check it out.
Right, and maybe they would just want to do it for laughs. But hey, it's a free exchange of ideas, and
absolutely
to be fostered. To me, Facebook's approach should just be a banner on the top that says, "Don't believe everything you read," and that's called a day. Not them trying to decide which outlet is worthy and which outlet is telling the truth and which one's not. I mean, the New York Times was absolutely integral in the march to war and the march to invasion of Iraq, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's absolute. Cheney would whisper information to New York Times reporter. The New York Times would report it, and then Cheney goes on TV and says, "Well, the New York Times recently reported that." I mean, they were absolutely wrapped up in misleading the American people. Okay, but you can bet they rank sky high, AAA on any Facebook ranking of what's a credible outlet that we should let people look at. And of course, I'm not saying they shouldn't be looking at New York Times, but they should be able to look at everything. It should be even landscape out there in terms of people finding what they want. So we'll see. I mean, part of me is optimistic that technology itself and the relentless human desire for the facts and the truth between those two, that something new will come up that help us bypass all that.
And then you have organizations like Prop or Not that will give you a list of like things that are propaganda, and then you shouldn't listen to this outlet, you shouldn't listen to that. I mean, it's hilarious that RT is considered a propaganda outlet. I mean, I'm not gonna get my Russian news from RT, but when it comes down to American news, like RT America, I mean, they have Larry King on there. They have Jesse Ventura. That Tom Hartman had a show on there forever. I mean, these people are not all Russian spies. If these people had a show on American TV, Tom Hartman, who's been on, progressive radio host for a long time, he's on the radio. Like, he's not considered a Russian spy. You look at Larry King, you look at Jesse Ventura.
Rick Sanchez, the former CNN anchor.
Yeah.
I saw him speak recently at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity conference a couple weeks ago, and he told the story of he was writing a book, kind of a memoir, and his CNN contract gave CNN the right to censor it, to review it and possibly censor it, right? That's fine. That's a contract he signed, right? So anyway, but he had a whole chapter kind of pointing to the bad parts of U.S. foreign policy, and CNN said, "Well, you can't include that." It's like, that's not. They want to censor that. They weren't censoring, "Oh, this is inside trade secrets of CNN." They didn't want him talking negatively about U.S. foreign policy.
And I think it was Phil Donahue. Did he have he had a show on MSNBC?
I don't know if he. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah.
right before the Gulf War, right? Or the go ahead.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was. Was it a Gulf War or was it Iraq War? Well, he
I
was
think
like,
Iraq. Yeah.
it was. Yeah, it was. He was very anti, war, and then not obviously not speaking highly of going to Iraq, and they pulled it, and they pulled the show, and it was the highest rated show at the time. I know Jesse Ventura has a similar story, which he's told a bunch of times. When he was on my show, I think he even told about how they basically paid him. I don't know if it was he got a contract for somebody. There were a couple of channels were bidding for his services for him to have a show on, and then they paid some serious money to get to for a show, and then when they realized that he was going to be anti-war, they told him, hey, how about you don't talk about this? And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So they're like, okay, well, we're just going to pay you, and you can't go work anywhere else, and we'll just pay you for a couple years to do a couple million or whatever it was to just basically live your life and just shut your mouth and don't talk about anything. And so he got paid to not, he got the money to do the show, but they didn't want the show because he was going to be anti-war. So they just paid him, and he didn't do the show. And, they just basically paid him to go away. And,
Wow.
this is the type of stuff that happens. It's mind-boggling. It's not, it's not left. It's not right. I mean, that's what I love about Ron Paul so much. I mean, he's one of those guests that I haven't checked off my bucket list yet, and I'd love to have on. And I've been trying to have him on because I was a huge fan of his message when he ran, and he brought so many people together. It didn't matter what your opinions were, if you agreed with libertarian philosophy or not. It was just the fact that he was anti-war. He was anti-war, and regardless on what side you were on, you couldn't disagree, with his foreign policy. You couldn't disagree with, what the things that he was saying, and he believed in what he was saying. One thing I loved about Ron Paul was that if you look at when he was running, and you look at when all the years he was in politics, he was always consistent. He always had the same beliefs, and anytime there was somebody fighting for the anti-war message or whatever, there was Ron Paul being outspoken and staying consistent with his views. So I would always tell people that, like, regardless if you agree with him or not, at least you know where he stands, because a lot of these politicians will just tell you what you want to hear to get your vote, and once they get your vote, they'll do whatever they want. They already have your vote. I think it was, I don't know, it was George Carlin or whoever it was that said, if voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it.
Right.
And that's kind of how voting is, right? It's like you don't vote for an issue, you vote for a politician that you cross your fingers once they get your vote, they'll stay true to what they're, the BS they sold you. And so that's what I think the Ron Paul movement was, like a spark of hope of, like, holy crap, like, he was getting all this momentum and all this stuff, but it also showed how you can get somebody with all this momentum, and both sides, no matter what political perspective you're coming from, he brought people together, and yet you could still make sure they don't, they don't get anywhere, and you can crush their political career. And you're going to see the same thing.
Absolutely. Look at
Tulsi
Ron
Gabbard is going to be another one.
Right, we're seeing that with her. Absolutely. And Ron Paul, 2012, he comes in second in New Hampshire. The next debates in South Carolina was like an hour and a half, and he got to talk for 90 seconds. Literally. I mean, it just shows you the shutdown that happens, and we're not going to be showing this to people. So
yeah, and I think it was Jon Stewart who had a segment where he was showing.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, when he was showing how they would, like, purposely, like, just not bring him up or not, they would talk about who's running, they would talk about, like, it was Iowa results, I think, and it was like for a straw poll. I don't know. He came in second in that or something, but they were talking about here's who's in first and here's who's in third. I mean, it was like that blatant where they would just skip it completely. Mind-boggling. Yeah. But
speaking of Ron Paul and censorship, his Daniel McAdams, his director of the Ron Paul Institute, this morning was permanently banned from Twitter.
What? This isn't the first time he's been banned. He's been like
suspended before. Now they're banning him, but only because he he called I can't remember who it was, but he referred to somebody. Oh, it was Hannity. He was tweeting back and forth with somebody. He said, "Oh yeah, he's retarded. Watching that sequence made my IQ go down 15 points, something to that effect."
That's what got him banned.
So yeah, retarded was deemed as an attack on, I don't know.
Do they realize how many racist things and how many? I mean,
if you Google or if you search retarded on Twitter, I mean, there's legions of people who have used that term and not get banned. However,
I was going to say, I'm
the
pretty
person
sure
challenging the foreign policy establishment, yeah, we'll go ahead and clip him off on this pretext here.
I'm pretty sure if hashtag retarded will come up with a lot of things that at least he has some, he's trying to you might not agree with that tweet, but Daniel he's done some good, with obviously with the Ron Paul Institute and trying to talk about foreign policy and whatnot. There's people who just use the word retarded and have contributed nothing, and they're not banned. So
exactly. So I mean, was it impolite? Yes. Possibly insensitive? No. But did it arise to being equivalent to inciting violence, which is kind of the category that they put it in? It's preposterous. So,
but you know what?
It gets. Go ahead.
If he was just trying to be funny too, it could be. This is the thing about humor on Twitter too. It's no different than when my wife, there's times where she'll be like, "Hey, how do you read this text message?" And because I might have a different perspective on how they're coming off than she will, and somebody could just try to be funny. Somebody could be attempting to be mean, but if your intentions are to be funny, it's Patrice O'Neill, this comedian. There's a great rest in peace. He passed away, but he was on Fox News once, and he was defending comedians' right to kind of be over the top and say things that some people might find offensive. And he was making a very, very good point, and a point that I make all the time, that if your intentions are to be funny, then I think you should have much more room for error, room to maybe attempt to say something funny and then, accidentally offend some people. Then if your intentions are just to be mean, I think when somebody's intentions are to be funny, it's like, yeah, some people might laugh and find it really funny, or, you might offend somebody and it doesn't come off funny, but to find out, you almost have to say the joke. You can't, because my interpretation might be like, I'm writing this tweet and I find it hilarious. I share it, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, holy crap! Like, apparently I was wrong. I thought this was funny, but a lot of people didn't agree with me. They took it the wrong way or whatnot. So I think that either way, people should have the right to do those things, that to attempt to be funny, and really, there's just about nothing you can say that doesn't offend somebody in some way. So it's like, where do you draw the line? It's like, people are going to be offended. And this is where, again, where I don't consider myself a libertarian, but I subscribe to a lot of libertarian ideas. Let the free market, decide, and don't decide by using, government or using, a corporation to get somebody in trouble. But you know what? Just use your own, your dollar by ignoring that person, or not buying their product, or not reading their blog, or not watching their documentary, or whatever it is. If you don't like that person, just ignore them. Like, don't.
Right. And Twitter lets you mute people, right? So you don't want to hear it, then you can.
You can mute them.
You're already empowered to do that.
And the crazy thing about Twitter is you only follow who you want to follow. Like, if you don't like somebody's opinions, nobody forces you to be exposed to their opinions. Like, you don't, like, it. To me, like, Facebook, it's funny how a lot of these issues happen on Twitter, a lot of this blocking and all this stuff, and you don't hear as much conversation on Facebook. But yet Facebook, I have plenty of people that I'm friends with on Facebook, that I'm friends with because I went to school with them, or I know them because I met them at a car show, or I played basketball with them, and I completely disagree with their opinions constantly. I see them posting stuff that I'm like, that is just complete nonsense, or they're completely ignorant to the facts, and yet, like, you don't see that big of a debate about free speech on Facebook. And on Twitter, like, I feel like it should be less of a problem, because I only follow who I want to follow. Like,
Yeah, it's easier to cultivate or to curate your own supply of what you're looking at. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. Now,
it
interestingly, to get back to that McAdams tweet, what started it was a tweet from Daniel pointing out the fact that Hannity did a big segment in which he was talking about the insidious power of the deep state, all while wearing a CIA lapel pin.
wow.
And so McAdams is pointing to the moronic irony of that combination of being a big CIA fan and supposedly warning about the deep state, and that's what then led him to his Twitter doom eventually when he used the word retarded, just trying to be funny, like you said.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's kind of like recently CNN host, I forget what his name is, the Cuomo or whatever his name is. He who is just
Andrew Cuomo, right?
Yeah, I can't stand him at all. But he talked about how, let's not worry about who Epstein is connected to. Let's not worry about who his friends are. I'm like, what do you like? What is wrong with these people? Like, it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind that people still watch the news. I think a lot of their ratings are just background. Because I go to the, I have a membership to 2 different gyms, and guess what's always on? Fox News, CNN, the mainstream media is always playing all day, all night in the background. You go to an airport, it's on in the background, so it's like, how much of their ratings are just that nonsense? But, when I meet people who actually watch MSNBC or actually watch Fox News, and they think that, like, it's news and it's, it's doesn't have a opinion, and it's the news station that they watch and the news show that they watch is the real news, and everything else is nonsense. I mean, I just, it's almost like they're lost. They're so far lost that I'm like, you almost know, like, if I'm gonna have this conversation, it's gonna be a long and torturous, and it's gonna take a lot of energy to try to eventually get through to them, and maybe even then I might not get through to them. It's hard. You don't know if you want to waste energy or not, but you just know that it's somebody who's, it's like I'm meeting somebody that I know has been brainwashed, and I have to unbrainwash them.
Right.
It's just
and where do you begin when every foundational thought they have is probably flawed to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like that quote, and I don't know who said it, because I'm notorious for apparently sharing really cool stuff that I can't I can't give credit to where it's due because I never remember. But the person who said, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them that they've been tricked,
Right.
and it's so true. Like, to convince somebody that, hey, what you've been told is a lie, or the way you look at the world, like it's all a lie, or your perspective or opinions are based on lies. Like, it's your first reaction, your first instinct is to get defensive, and
Right.
and I get it, I understand it, but but in a way, I guess it's important to still have those conversations, because another thing I constantly say on this podcast is that we're told, don't talk about politics or religion, don't talk about those things at the dinner table or at holiday get-togethers, but yet we can argue all day about sports. We can argue all day about other meaningless things, but yet the important conversations, we can't have. And to me, like, what we're doing when we're saying don't talk about politics is we're saying, ignorance is okay. Like, we shouldn't share any information. We shouldn't try to have these conversations and attempt to and learn to have these conversations in a civil manner. What we should do is just not have them at all. And to me, that's freaking crazy. Like, the idea that, like, we should say, like, hey, I have my opinion, let's not even bother attempting to gather new information to see if it changes my opinion. Like, to me, that is the definition of ignorant. And we're basically saying, people, it's okay to be ignorant. Like, just don't even bother having these important conversations. Wherever you stand, wherever I stand, and let it be. To me, that's not how you grow. If you only talk to people you agree with, you don't learn as much as if when you have discussions with people you disagree with. Those are
Right.
people. Those are the interesting discussions. Those are the people, because there's so many perspectives and and opinions and information that, obviously we can't gather all the information in the world. You might have read something or looked at something from a perspective because of your upbringing that gives you a outcome that I didn't get to because of my background or because of what I read. But you sharing that perspective might change my perspective and might help mold a better opinion. So I think it's so important to have discussions with people you disagree with, as long as you can do it in a civil manner. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah,
and sometimes impossible part. Yeah, that's the challenge. So, but yeah, Brian, I've taken so much of your time. Sorry, I sometimes I don't know when to stop. these discussions I feel like are so important, and I think many people listen to these podcasts because these are the discussions they wish they could have, and much like they're much like me, where in my everyday life, people I hang out with on a regular basis, if it's close friends, my wife, whoever it may be, I don't have the benefit of having these discussions. They might not necessarily be into the same things that I'm into. So that's why I love having these podcasts, because it isn't just, for the listeners, discussions about topics they're interested, but it's also my chance to have a discussion on the topics I'm into and grow from these discussions. So, I definitely gain a lot from these talks and being able to meet people like yourself and kind of, get your perspectives and opinions. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time and sharing your research, sharing your perspective and opinions and taking the time to have this talk.
Yeah, it was great to be with you. And listeners can go to 28pages.org. They can read the 28 pages themselves, and also look into some other things I've reported on. Like one of the more top articles that you'll see there is about the FBI instructing a former agent that he shouldn't help 9/11 victims in the civil case against Saudi Arabia because the Trump administration was trying to have a good relationship with the kingdom. So, that was a story reported only at 28pages.org. Never got follow-on coverage, even though I think it's pretty damning that the FBI, part of the Department of Justice, would put its hand on the scale that way in a civil suit and tell an FBI agent they shouldn't be helping 9/11 victims make a case. So they might find that interesting. But it's great to be with you today.
Yeah, that's a wild case. Yeah, that's nuts. So, do you update 28pages.org pretty regularly?
I've been on a bit of a hiatus, but there's a wealth of pretty interesting articles there, including the other one I mentioned to you, where my interview with Lawrence Wilkerson, his perspective on the 28 pages and how that relates to the march to war in Iraq. The fact that that was that they didn't want any discussion of Saudi Arabia popping up while the whole drumbeat was about Iraq, and also extensive reporting on a lobbying scandal, pretty sensational, in which lobbyists for Saudi Arabia tricked well-intentioned U.S. military veterans into lobbying against the 9/11 families and the law that enabled them to continue with their suit without ever telling them that Saudi Arabia had paid their way to Washington, and that's who they were really helping out. So that's a whole nother story, but they can check that out. Yeah, Top Navigation says Saudi lobbying scandal. They can dive on in for all the juicy details and the reactions from these veterans when they realized they'd been used.
And of course, you have a Twitter account, and I don't.
Yeah, at 28 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, at 28 pages.
Yeah,
I don't believe you're on Facebook, right? Are you?
There's a 28 pages Facebook page. It's pretty much gone dormant, relating to what we were talking about earlier. After the Russia scare and the pushback and Congress beating the drum for Facebook to control, they dramatically, you can like 28pages.org on Facebook. The odds of Facebook then presenting to you something that I've posted to it is so slim. Had upwards of 5,000 followers, and all of a sudden when I'd post stuff, they would present it to 300 people. And then the next day say, hey, this could be presented to more people if you pay money to promote it. It's just give it to the people who've signed up. I understand if you don't want to just have it popping up randomly, but these are people who said, I like this page, and they still don't present it. So Facebook's a real sore point with me in terms of direct impact on what I do, and I'm sure you talk to a lot of other people who've had the same impact.
Oh yeah, and when that was happening, there's a lot of musicians that I follow on Facebook that they were constantly complaining about how we have this many thousands or this many million followers or people who like our page, and yet nobody's seeing our posts about the show that we just played or the upcoming concert or the new music we just released. And it's like it was such a scam. I mean, it was
Right.
like, hey, we're gonna create this system where people can like and see things that are on your page, and then once you do that and you buy in, now they're like, okay, now we're going to restrict this, and we're
Yes.
going to, I mean, that was the whole reason why we went on to Facebook and we followed these artists, or we followed your page or whoever's page, is because it's like,
Yeah.
oh cool, it's a great one-stop shop where I can see all the things I want to see. I can just
I want to see, right? Yeah, I mean, and Facebook is so parental now. It's parental. Why not let your users choose their experience? So if there's users who are like terrified of the notion of seeing something that might not be true, then okay, then let them put on the setting that yields this horrible result we've got right now. But if there's other people who want to let it rip, I want to see whatever the heck's out there, and I know a lot of it might be false, and I'm an adult and will reach my own conclusions, and let them pick a setting on the dial that says that. But everybody right now gets the parental treatment where they're chaperoned around the internet, and it's pretty bleak. So yeah, my posting is very, very few and far between these days. So Twitter at 28 pages is probably the better one to look at.
Yeah, which is to go back to Daniel being censored. It's hilarious because I think they still let porn on Twitter. Like you can follow like some porn star that is showing complete nudity, and that's completely okay. But God forbid you call somebody a retard. It's like,
right.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, we live in a crazy world. But thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate the time, and hopefully have you on again in the near future, and we'll do some catching up and see what you're up to.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks. For
okay, you bet.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.